Hi, I am going to be talking about forming a C-Corp today. Basically, I have been trying to do an overview of the primary business forms so that small businesses can get an idea of which formation is the best one for them, depending on their future anticipated growth, depending on what their market is, whether they have, startup investment, um, how much money is coming in and how much is going to be spent on building the business and the brand, and how much you anticipate, if you anticipate some fairly large growth right off the bat. And that can be very easily foreseen with things like major patents, or just major big business. If you end up being the company that, say, you strike it rich and you take over Shell Oil, you would start off, with a C Corp, and your C Corp would, take over Shell. So, at any rate, I have mentioned in the past, now I've done 2 of these videos prior, and the videos were the LLC formation basics and the S Corp formation basics. In the future, I plan to do partnerships, sole proprietorships, and agency, and which is also like doing business as, or DBAs. So that would be 2 future videos, as well as converting. For instance, converting from a C Corp to a smaller entity, which is always a terrible idea. Or converting up from an LLC or a partnership to an S Corp or a C Corp. So at any rate, today I wanted to go over C Corps. Since you've seen a couple of my videos in the past, then you already have an idea of kind of what I'm talking about. As a lawyer for small businesses, I find myself advising most people to adopt very basic formations. Most of us, when we start out, are just kind of hanging a shingle. We're just going door to door, on foot. We're doing the legwork. Basic networking in our territory, in our region. Now with global startups on the internet, things might be a little bit different, and people might see more of an advantage to starting out a little bit bigger. You can still do that with C Corps or with LLCs, and of course you can do it with C Corps, and I'm about to go into that a little bit more. Some of to start, C Corps it's a chapter in the Internal Revenue Code. It's an IRS designation that provides basically a separate entity from yourself and your home and your own ownership to create what is considered to be a natural person. It's a business. And a joke among lawyers is when, there are some states or cities that have carpool lanes, but you have to use, you can only use the carpool lane if you have more than one person in the car. And there are some, business people who will carry their formation documents and say, well, it's me and my natural person entity. So, I don't get a ticket for being a sole driver in the carpool lane, but of course it doesn't work. People do that. At any rate, they're obviously not Detroiters. At any rate, it's considered to be a natural person. It's actually called a person. But I typically refer to it as a legal entity, and sometimes as a legal fiction. But at any rate, it is considered, that's how, one way that the law uses this terminology to kind of distinguish, so that people in their minds can really understand that it is a separate person. And sometimes it's a person that is owned by more than one owner. And so, for instance, as a lawyer, if I'm friends with one of the owners and they come to me seeking legal representation, I have to identify whether I'm representing that specific owner's interest in the business or if I'm representing the business. Typically, if I represent the business itself, I am representing that business, and I can only represent that business. I can't even act outside of the the interests of that business, no matter who's sitting in my office. So it's interesting in a lot of ways, but at any rate, so the Internal Revenue Code sections 301 to 395 designate C corporate status. C corps are usually identifiable because they are dually taxed. Dual taxation means that when a corporation has achieved a level of success, that it has profits, those profits are taxed. And then when they are distributed as income to the shareholders or the owners, and at that point the company doesn't have any more profit, it has given all the profit to all of its owners, it is taxed again. So it seems like it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, why would you choose an entity that taxes the same income twice? But there are a couple of reasons. First of all, you have, in a C Corp, you have lower tax rate that applies. It applies at 15%, which is so much lower than with any other entity. Most entities are taxed at like 25% above a certain amount of income. So it ends up being just, it's like $3,500 for an LLC off the bat, and then if you make more than a certain amount, then you end up getting taxed at 25% on top of it. So it ends up being, it can be burdensome. Your tax debt can be burdensome unless you know how to really, expense out your, which I like to do. As a business attorney, I advise people, basically make everything that you do about your business. And most small business owners know that already. It's pretty cut and dried. It's, you live and breathe your business. And for the most part, if you drive anywhere for your business, you count those miles, and it's like 75 cents a mile. So it's almost like the further you go, the more money that you can actually kind of save, even though you're spending it. But at the end of the tax year, you're kind of getting that money back. And if you go out to eat somewhere, then just be sure to invite a business associate, and make it about business. So yeah, if you're having a party, then you want to always invite, a whole bunch of your customers, your clients, your associates, your future associates, etc. That's the best way to do things, Of course, you have to prove it, and you want to make sure that you, just in case you get audited. And maybe I might do a separate video on that. It's not so much like scheming, how to prevent it. It's more like how to ensure that you're actually doing things on the up and up. So, the 15% tax rate is definitely a bonus, but there are, again, ways that you can avoid the dual taxation of a C Corp, and that includes things like, instead of just making distributions to the owners, you actually hire the owners as employees, and they get a salary. So while the profits are taxed at the company level, you would be able to be the president of the company, or the CEO, or whatever, the prime operations manager, or whatever, you know what I mean? You can come up with whatever, but make sure that that is actually a position that is actually doing a job that has real responsibilities and real duties, and that you can prove that those duties have been done to benefit the corporation. I mean, like I said, the corporation is still a separate entity, a separate person that has to show growth. It's like you have to make sure that you are actually feeding that person and they grow, and feeding and clothing, etc., and taking care of that person. At any rate, so you do want to, if you're going to try and avoid, the tax on the dual tax on distributions, then you want to have a position or a role for your shareholders. And I'm again talking about small businesses. I'm not talking about the GMs or the Chryslers. I'm talking about small businesses where there are fewer than 30 owners. It might only be fewer than 5 owners, or it might be a single owner. It's at that point, like I said, you want to make sure that that person is on the payroll, or those people are on the payroll, and that they're actually contributing in some way to the company, so that the taxation won't actually adversely affect the your earnings, your capital. Um, so basically, you just want to make sure that you do know what is expensed out, whether it's you hire independent contractors even, and those are things that you can deduct at the end of the year also, so that you basically have no taxable income. Your company sees no income at the end of the year. Um, it sounds backwards, but when you know a little bit about your what a company is supposed to do, how do you encourage people to invest in your company or to believe in your company if you show them your profit and loss statements, or, well, your balance sheet or whatever, and there's like a zero balance at all times? That is when you do show like an actual profit and loss statement, so that they see where it goes. Because if you want to get financing from a bank in order to grow, or if you want to get an investor or whoever involved, then you do want to show that it's a profitable company, or actually that the business is good, but even, that there's like no income, so that you can keep your income and it's not taxed. That's really what an LLC is, a partnership, an S-Corp. Those are all legal, natural people. But a C-Corp was the original form, and all these little tips and tricks and loopholes came into being with savvy businessmen and women, and predictably businessmen at the time, and lawyers and judges, in fact, who agreed with it, that that's exactly what it's for. It's not, this country is run on an economy of business and capitalism, and it's just not unheard of, as the point is to make money, not to lose it. Okay, so the interesting thing about a C Corp too is that you can choose where you want to incorporate. Typically you have to have a reasonable relationship with where the business is operated. But with a C Corp, you can have two places. Delaware is the most popular place for big businesses to incorporate. And you will always see like Delaware, all banks are incorporated in Delaware. Some of them in Nebraska, and I'm not exactly sure why. Omaha is a really big bank city, and Nebraska, big bank state. But Delaware is huge for business. It is, its laws are created to support business as opposed to, criminalize it. It just has very liberal approach to businesses. In fact, has a general corporations law that is actually quite massive, and the courts there are very, very versed in business law and how to rationalize a lot of business activity. Some people, like artists, who tend to be very conscious of the environment and the world around them and the people around them, probably look at big business like, it's the devil, and and a place like Delaware as as supporting that, which it does in a way, but it also can support good things too. And that's, you don't have to look at just the negative. There's a way to make it work for the benefit of all of us, and that's kind of what I try and do. I haven't really seen it yet personally, but it's true that many artists who are just regular people, small business people in the first place, can grow to be very large businesses. Bill Gates did it, although I didn't know him and I never represented him. My point is that that's really what happens. Sometimes good people, blow up and become, huge forces in the world. So you just want to make sure that you know what you're doing, so that when that happens to you, that that you can utilize these laws to protect the good that you do. So at any rate, now, if you do incorporate in Delaware, which at this stage in the game would just be kind of silly, but at your earlier stages. But for instance, at a later stage, you might want to set up a franchise out in Delaware, have a headquarters or something in Delaware, or have a secondary office in Delaware with a registered agent that can be a lawyer in Delaware, just in order to use their courts. That's really the point of it. The point is to make sure that when there's a lawsuit because who knows, somebody got sick at one of your events and the ambulance didn't arrive on time because of the throngs of people or because of some sort of potential ineptitude, that the ticket that they bought to go to the event actually says on the back of it, jurisdiction is Delaware, and you can go to Delaware and say, well, I had insurance, I had security on staff, I had an ambulance on staff, I had a medic on staff, and this was, the person faltered by not getting there on time or whatever. Who knows? At any rate, this, it can protect your business. So now I look like the bad guy. But anyway, so that's really the point of incorporating it all in Delaware, is just to ensure that you have the most protections at hand with courts that know business. They understand what business is and what it does. Another way to do that without incorporating in Delaware is to always have an arbitration clause in all of your contracts. And again, with that example of a ticket purchase, on the back of the ticket that they purchased and attended the event, to say, any issues will remain out of court. You agree that any issues will remain out of court and they will be arbitrated before an arbitrator of my choice, or a facilitative mediator of my choice. And they'd have to abide by it because they bought their ticket and they agreed to it. That's what that is. So, and it's the same thing as a term of use license or term of service license that you use on Facebook or on YouTube that I myself am supporting by uploading these videos. Who knows? Someone might go out and say, well, the law office of Susan Salas out of Michigan said do this, and I did, and now look what happened, and try and sue me for it. And I would revert back to the YouTube license that I agreed to, that it says that anyways, whatever. So, unfortunately, there are ways, that you can definitely protect yourself. But the best way to do it, of course, is to actually sit in a lawyer's office and talk with them about your specific needs, rather than following, the YouTube guru who you like. So, at any rate, then now a C-Corp has certain strictures, and it can actually be very daunting. If you're a single member corporation, or if you are a small group, closely held group that's not publicly owned, you can go ahead with your C-Corp status and follow the C-Corp guidelines, which it's not that big of a deal, but it really sounds like it if you just want something super basic and easy. So, for instance, you do need to file your certificate of incorporation with the state, and that must detail the number of shares that you're going to authorize, the classes or the series, how many, if there's going to be common and preferred, if there's going to be Class A, Class B, Class C, what that actually means, or a series, if they're going to be released, every 6 months, or, every 2 years, or whatever, as the company grows. There's, you do have to outline it. It can be changed later on. And in fact, it can be changed immediately when you have your initial meeting of your board of directors, which happens as soon as you're done filing your certificate of incorporation. You would have your initial annual meeting of your board of directors, and again, it can just be one person or it can be 2 or 3 people, but you do have to document exactly what happened there and how you made these decisions. You want to keep your minutes of each meeting, identify officers, employees, their salaries. You want to open a bank account, and you want to adopt contracts that were made prior to the official organization of the company. So, for instance, your promoters or investors who those contracts, who your promoter might have made some contracts to advertise, and those contracts need to be adopted by the corporation, and it has to be there in the minutes. And if it's not, see, these kinds of things, it's kind of just, you want to talk with a lawyer to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row. So I don't know, let's see what else. The I don't know, there's beyond that, you have agreements and trusts, voting trusts among shareholders, shareholder agreements. For instance, you do have your annual meetings, and you can determine, well, I don't want to see this person as the president of the company anymore. I don't like the direction that it's going in. And suddenly, you're outvoted 2-3, or 2-1 rather, if you've got 3 people. You want to make sure that perhaps you can't do that, and you want to have these kind of agreements in place, among your shareholders. And you'd have to have, of course, a lawyer present, or at least maybe who could draft the documents for you to ensure that these things are done correctly, so that you can't be voted out, so that there's no ejectment of one shareholder just because they decided to gang up on you and buy you out before the company got huge. Again, people don't like to talk like that, but that stuff happens so regularly. I don't know why people don't like to talk about it. It's like some type of a bad omen or something. And it's like, no, you just want to make sure to cover all of your bases just in case. You never, ever, ever know what's going to happen. People take marriage vows and get divorced pretty regularly nowadays. And that's, just between 2 people, let alone a company where it's, there's no children involved. You know what I mean? It's like I don't know. So just, and all it is money at that point. And of course, people are going to consider, who to oust at one point or another, and it might be you. So you want to make sure to have that stuff taken care of before you move forward. So of course, you can also use your agreements to contract around the default regulations that each state has. Every state has a Corporations Act. And where you don't have contracts in place, there are default rules. So, for instance, there are some good ones. For instance, the 15% taxation rate, the continuity of life, a long-lived company, natural person. It's automatic. You could contract around any of that, except for taxation rate, of course. But you can contract around things like, how is the company going to dissolve? What events or conduct forces dissolution of the company automatically, if any? But you do want to identify those issues. Again, with voting rights, voting trusts, cumulative versus straight voting, quorums, supermajority, you want to make sure that you know exactly what each of these things are before you sign on as a C-Corp. But what's good about a C-Corp is that you don't have to, first of all, it doesn't die. It continues perpetually. And you don't have to ever consider changing or converting your company. You're pretty much there when you're a C-Corp. And then you just have to know some of the intricacies so that you don't get damaged or burned later on, either by, messing around with your taxation or with your co-owners. So that's kind of like those are pretty much the trickiest parts of a C-Corp. And I don't want to make it sound like it's too easy, because it really simply might not be, just depending. And I don't want to make it sound too daunting, because it's not impossible. It's something that people do all the time, and people have done it, for years and years and years. So it's definitely doable by any and all. And I hope that you will seek the help and advice of an attorney. And again, I always support the notion that a few $100 or $1,000 goes a very long way in preventing the loss of, your whole company at a later date. And a lot of attorneys will work on some kind of a payment plan, so it's something that you do want to consider before you actually start. But again, I'm going to be continuing in this series. I just want to wrap it up really quickly. It didn't feel like 25 minutes, but it sure has been. And thanks for hanging in there. But I'm going to be talking a little bit about partnerships next time, and agency, sole proprietorships, and doing business as. And in a future video on converting your corporations, identifying, some of the tax issues. That one's going to be a little bit more, a little bit short and sweet, perhaps a little bit more confusing, I'm not sure. But please feel free to contact me with any questions. Go to my website at salaslawonline.com. It's posted below, and please ask any questions. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you. Bye.